Welcome to the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.
Endless journey of delight and profitability.
I think some people use it as a derogatory term towards accountants.
Being visible to the employees is important.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Asset Reliability at Work. Today's episode is titled Breaking Down Barriers with a One Plant, One Team Approach. And we have a brand new guest for us here on the podcast, Mr. Johnny Brown. Yeah. Oh, by the way, this is Tara Holwegner and, of course, my esteemed special co-host,
Derek Kelly, and thank you for that wonderful, warm introduction, Tara.
I always focus on our guests first, right? So we come second. So Johnny Brown is an asset management services technician with Lifecycle Engineering. In today's episode, we're going to discuss some common barriers that exist in a manufacturing facility and how to mitigate those issues and establish a high-functioning and cohesive environment. So, hey, Johnny, thanks for joining us today in the studio.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So can you give us a brief description regarding your background?
Well, my background in maintenance and management started in the United States Navy on submarines. And on submarines, maintenance is very, very important. Team building and teamwork is nonstop, and cross-training is across the board.
So listeners, as we get into this discussion, get really into the weeds of this, talking about these barriers and how to kind of break them down to form what Johnny's coined as the, one plant, one team approach. This is an article that Johnny wrote in the past, but we thought it was so good that we really wanted to bring it, to the podcast and really have a discussion about this in detail. So again, at the end of the episode, I'll tell you about the show notes and where to find that link to the paper. So, Johnny, let's get right into it now. I'm going to ask you my first question. What barriers are present in a manufacturing environment? Unfortunately for me, I don't have that knowledge base. So I don't really, I know what goes on because I talk to smart people like you who have been there and seen that. So what are these barriers that are present? And can you give an example of one?
Well, let me give a little bit of background. After spending a career in the Navy where there's a lot of teamwork, I went to work for a manufacturing plant. And soon after I started working there, I realized that there wasn't the communication across the boards from upper management to the deck plates that I was used to seeing. So I started looking into it a little bit, and I noticed that people were not communicating, and many people that were not immediately involved with the production of the product felt no ownership of the process. There was not a one team. Everybody was their own team. The administration was a team, the maintenance was a team, the operations was a team, and there was no cohesiveness across the board.
So in silos, pretty much. The departments were in each in their own little silo, not working together. I got you.
Correct, and nobody felt much of an ownership.
Well, I'll tell you what, that definitely is different from your submarine background. I mean, think about it. You're in close quarters, potentially unfriendly waters, the bottom of the ocean. No room for error. You don't have time or space for silos.
No.
So, in your words, can you enlighten us as to why you think these barriers exist?
Well, I just think from my experience is it's not encouraged, for instance, the upper management to get out in the plant and walk through the dirty areas, for instance.
The Gemba walk, as they call it, right?
And get to know the operators or the maintenance people or even the vendors that, fill up their Coke machines. And one thing that I've experienced was during a shutdown one time, soon after I went to work with this company, we were having a outage, and I walked in the control room, and there were 5 operators sitting there. And so I asked them, I said, what do you do during an outage like this? They said, we're doing it. Nothing? They said, we sit here for 12 hours a day. And I thought that was a waste of time, a waste of money, and a waste of talent.
Absolutely. Hitting a bunch of those mudas,
yes,
right?
Correct.
Yeah. So the Gemba walk, the walking around and asking why, like Mr. Ono said, ask why, ask what are you doing?
Johnny, I think you went ahead and actually answered my second question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it again just in case you want to add more to it. I'm curious, do these disconnects, these barriers, affect also the management level as well as, basically the floor level? Because you talked about the silos that exist at the floor level, and I was just kind of curious to get the management side of things to see if it's prevalent at that level. What's your take?
Yes, it's at all levels. The upper management a lot of times don't feel that they have the time to be out in the plant where the operators are, and the operators don't feel that they have a place to go into the administration areas and the engineering spaces to build a rapport.
So what's the solution in getting past these issues? Is this a simple fix?
No, it's not. It takes a lot of effort. The beginning of it has to start at the top. And one thing I've always said, and I believe in, as a leader, you have to lead by example. Go back and tell a little bit about how I implemented this at where I was working. Was I went right to the plant manager and I started talking to him. And I said, I've been out walking around the plant, especially in the 1/3 of the plant that I'm responsible for. People just don't know other people. The operators know the operators, the maintenance teams know the maintenance team. Why don't we do some cross-training that I've been used to my whole adult life? And he said, well, let's talk about that sometime. Well, we did. We sat down a couple weeks later, and I told him, I said, we have a lot of talent out there in the control rooms that is not being utilized during our outages, for instance. Why can't we use our operators, take one of them and assign them to a maintenance team of 2 maintenance techs and let them work side by side during an outage? That way they will not only get to know the maintenance teams, they will get to know their equipment. After a couple weeks, the plant manager came back to me and he said, that's a great idea. He said, could you come in and sell that to the executive leadership team? And I said, I'd love to. So I went in and I gave my presentation to the executive leadership team, and they thought it was a great idea, but they didn't really know how to get off the ground with it. So I took, little steps at a time. Well, let's go talk to the supervisors. Okay, we talked to the supervisors.
Maintenance and operations?
Maintenance and operations, yes. And not just maintenance operations, but also in IT
Sure.
and human resources. So across the board, talked to all the supervisors there. They thought, wow, that's a great idea. Then I went down and talked to the operators and the maintenance techs. Said, hey, guys, how would you like to do a little bit of team building here? And how would you like to have some more help during the outages? And, they all thought, well, that's pretty good. And
What about did you encounter resistance from either side, or was it pretty much hey, let's give this a try? You got to be bored sitting around for 12 hours.
Well, that was part of the problem. There was no team
Right.
between the maintenance teams and the operators. So as I kind of sold this to the operators and the maintenance, I said, for the maintenance guys, not only will you have some more help, these guys will be able to learn about the equipment, get familiar with the equipment.
And identify issues, yeah.
And be able to identify breakdowns before they happen. And on the other side, for the operators, this is an opportunity for you to learn more about your equipment. And I said also, as an operator, you get to know the equipment and you get enough hands-on experience, we can possibly promote you from within to a maintenance tech, which would you be making a lot more money.
There you go. So change management extraordinaire, Johnny Brown, working on the best radio station there is, WIIFM. What's in it for me?
All right, Johnny. So in your article, you mentioned, in your opinion, it was a 2-step process to kind of break down those barriers. So Can you talk about what that first step was?
Well, the first step was I had to sell it to the executive leadership team.
So start at the top.
Start at the very top. And I had to get them because anybody that's a leader needs to lead by example.
Very true.
And if you see your leaders out there, you want to do what they do. And you want to satisfy them, and you want to have some job satisfaction, getting everybody involved, getting everybody on the same team through building. It does that because not only does the operators and the maintenance techs feel good, but you also get your administrative people involved in the process improvement teams or equipment improvement teams. And they have meetings and they get to know one another. And sometimes when you have somebody maybe in human resources that might come up with an idea and say, hey, this may be way out there, but why don't we try this? Well, that's great because that's one of the problems that they have sometimes. They don't think out of the box because they are so familiar with the equipment, with the process. So somebody like an HR person may say, well, that's a dumb question. Well, it's not. There are no dumb questions when it comes to job satisfaction, safety, and teamwork.
Preach, Johnny. That was really profound, actually. I want to talk a little bit more about what you said about selling the idea. So after you sell the idea of a one plant, one team approach, then what's the next step?
Well, the next step is to implement it. And through that, you have to select some projects. And you have to set these people up for success.
Yeah.
You can't throw them to the wolves and expect them to find their way out. It takes some leadership, and you have to take baby steps at first and let them feel a sense of success.
Accomplishment, and celebrate those
Correct.
accomplishments, and have leadership celebrate those accomplishments and share that across all the groups, right?
Correct.
Say it loud and proud.
And
That's
that was
awesome.
one of the first things that I recommended we do. We take on a simple project, and we get people from every department on the plant, and we have a team, and they met once a week. We provided lunch. We really pushed hard for this project to be a success. And when the people on the process improvement team saw that their ideas were being implemented, that was a big morale booster. And these people wanted to tackle another job.
Do you remember about how long it took to start to see some benefits and results from that first project? Or should people, when they're looking for a good starter project, should it be able to be fixed within 30 days, 60 days, 90 days?
Well, a lot of times it depends on the complexity of the problem. But like I said, you're starting off easy and kind of working your way through learning the whole process and getting people educated on the plant. For instance, the IT person had never been in the majority of the manufacturing areas because it's a dirty area. There's no IT equipment there. He had no reason to be there. They got out and they walked the plant. Office people were wearing in their work clothes, dirty boots, and they really got a sense of appreciation for what they had out there. And as the team worked through this process, it was amazing to see the amount of ownership across the board people were feeling.
Johnny, I want to go back really quick, if you don't mind. Go back to talking about step one real quick, because it sounds like it's easier said than done as you try to sell it to the leadership team. Do you think that people often encounter a lot of resistance trying to implement something like this with the leadership team? And if so, how do they get past that?
I think they do at a lot of places because your managers and your leaders, they get overwhelmed with their current tasks and they just can't see taking on anything more. So it's sometimes they'll say, well, let's talk about this later. Let's talk about this later. Well, later never comes.
Sure. It's always later. Keep pushing it back until nothing ever happens, right?
Correct. And so that's one thing you have to be is consistent in driving this and trying to sell it. Once you can get the management team and, like I said, the plant manager on board, then the hardest part is done because he can push it from his way and you can push it from your way.
So create that sense of urgency, really.
Correct.
That it needs to get done today, not
Correct.
tomorrow. I got you. Makes sense.
Correct. And then another thing, that as a result of these process action teams or process improvement teams, it wasn't long that people were wanting to put posters to show what they had done. They really, you walk in the plant and you saw a poster that this modification had been completed by this process team. It listed their names. So what a real sense of ownership for everybody on that team.
Well, the show and tell thing, I think, is very important.
Absolutely. Not only do all the employees see it, but every visitor that comes to the plant sees it.
Wow, Johnny, I think you've given our listeners a lot to think about, and I think you've given some people who have ideas about improvement some next steps that they can take. We do have a couple of resources that are going to be available. Derek, you want to tell our listeners about them?
Yeah. And again, so just to go back and recap really quick. So the first thing to do, the first task, is to sell the idea of a one plant, one team approach to the leadership team. So
Correct.
Create that urgency like we just talked about. And then the second step, obviously, is to implement that.
Correct.
We have a couple of resources available in our show notes. So the first one is Johnny's article that we're talking about right now, which is same title, Break Down Barriers with a One Plant, One Team Approach. And then we have another article that's very similar, Breaking Down Organizational Barriers by Creating Plant Partnerships, another great resource. And then our last resource is How Do You Create Partnership Agreements, another great thing to read. And then, of course, we also have Johnny's LinkedIn profile available for you to connect with him and ask him any questions you might have on this subject.
Well, thanks for joining us, Johnny. We hope you can come back and visit us in the studio sometime.
I would love to. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's signing off on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast. Thanks for joining.
Bye-bye.
Hey, listeners, one more thing before you go. If you have any feedback for the show, or you have maybe some suggestions for upcoming topics you'd love to hear about, we'd like to hear from you. So there's two ways to get in contact with us. The first is on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @LCE_today, so be sure to follow us. And then the other way is to email the show at podcast@lce.com. Once again, thank you for joining the show, and we look forward to more episodes on the Asset Reliability at Work podcast.